Hi listeners, thanks again for joining for another episode in my Ellevate series with your host, me, Becky. In this podcast, we talk about all things women empowerment, challenges in the recruitment industry, career progression, and anything else that is empowering women in business. Thanks for listening, and please remember to follow and subscribe for all updates. In today's episode, I'll be interviewing Angeley Mullins. I'm super excited about this one because Angeley has some fantastic experience we'll be discussing. Angeley and I met a few months ago in an event in Berlin, and since then we've been in conversations about all things women empowerment, challenges, and off the back of International Women's Day last week, this comes at the perfect time. So yeah, without any more delays, Angeley, would you like to start out by introducing yourself?
Of course, and thank you, Becky, and really nice to be here. So I'm Angeley. I'm originally actually from California, but I've been in Berlin for the past 3 years, and I have a really broad experience over the past 20 years leading commercial teams and divisions for companies across the US, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Mostly actually e-commerce and B2B SaaS, but mostly in the commercial space. So marketing, sales, customer success. So really nice to be here today.
Perfect, thank you. So let's start out, Angeley, and go through maybe from your perspective, what are some of your personal experiences or reasons that motivated you to, think or care more about women's empowerment?
It was one of the interesting things, coming up through the ranks and then, of course, into leadership positions. We're always taught you can do anything, you can be anything. And then you get out into society, into the working world, and you're facing those headwinds. And the really interesting thing for me is I've had a lot of mentors, and I've had mentors that are my same age and also mentors that are older. And especially when I ask the older mentors, the one thing that they've noticed is we're talking about some of the same issues as was happening in their generation. So this is one of the things that has really focused me on not just female empowerment, but opportunity and bringing the discussions to light, because the only way to overcome these same challenges is to really make sure that we're discussing them. So hopefully in another 20 years, we don't have to be discussing them anymore.
And I guess from your recent experience, have you started to notice that improve, or do you think there's still quite a long way to go on that?
There are some things that have improved and some things that frankly have either stayed the same or I would say have had minimal improvement. So some of the things that have improved over time is we're starting to see more women in leadership roles, but I personally would like to see a diversity of those roles. So a lot of times I see women in marketing, HR leadership roles. Of course, I personally like to see more in CTOs, CPOs, this sort of thing. There are more women coming up in engineering roles and more women coming up in engineering through the education system, and of course more female CEOs, but still female leadership is underrepresented in VC firms, in boards, and of course if things are underrepresented at the very, very top, it just keeps trickling down. So we've made some progress, but there's still some of the things that are unchanged. Also females and the imposter syndrome that keeps happening. So, those of us who are in leadership roles, we feel like, do we have anything to say? Is it valuable? Will others listen? And then also, I would also say that females are still not taken as seriously as males in certain circumstances. So if they even have a seat at the table, once they do, when they have something to say, is it taken as seriously, as at the men that have something to say? So mixed reviews.
Sure. And obviously you're now in a very senior position, you've worked your way up, and that's fantastic, made it, I guess, in a way to the C-suite. What impacts do you think more senior women had on you when you were kind of climbing the ranks? Anything in particular that stands out? If you look back and kind of remember any standout moments that maybe caused you to think, I want to be able to be in that position to perhaps a female into the future who might be in that position?
I like this question because a lot of times, whether it's books or videos or panel discussions, a lot of people talk about read this book, take this class, do this specific technique. And that's never really what resonated with me. One of the best mentors, that I've ever had, she is ex-IBM, Pepsi is kind of thing. And she did it in the 70s and 80s when there weren't as many female executives. And one of the things she told me is she said, look, inner strength, how to be resilient, and toughness and resilience isn't always about that outworldly, I'm so tough. It's about that internal quiet resilience to keep going, persevering, overcoming all of the challenges. And so for me, it was super valuable because she really broke down what it actually takes to get there, instead of some kind of super, juicy, technique. And everybody knows these techniques come and go, but that strong, quiet resilience and making sure that you had that realistic expectation. So that's always what I try to now, from the mentees that I personally have, I always talk about this, what it's really like, what it really takes, because I think that will be most valuable for people.
Amazing. Cool. So moving into, I suppose, from your perspective, directly, obviously, you mentioned at the beginning, you've worked in several different countries, some multinational corporations, also your kind of startups. You've been involved in firms that have been private equity or VC backed. What experience, or like what major differences across different countries or geographies or regions, cultures have you noticed as a woman, if any, so far?
Wow. What I would say, and I think some of the biggest differences I've seen between Europe and the United States as far as organizational cultures. In the US, things are much more, they're faster, the pace is faster, they are much less risk adverse. What I've noticed in Europe is that companies especially don't like to take on as much risk. And I say that from a company perspective, but then also individually. There's a phenomenon that I've seen in Europe where people really want to be at one company for 10 years, or that seems to be really valued. And they'll talk about the longevity versus what you've actually done in the role, versus the United States, where it's really about what you've done in the role. It's not so much about how long you're in that position, unless you're constantly moving teams or moving up the ranks. So there's a difference in philosophy. As a woman, I find that it's actually quite interesting. The United States is usually seen as a place of progressiveness and the old-fashioned values of freedom, etc. But it hasn't progressed as far as we think. Even if you look to politics happening today, there's the Roe versus Wade, which is, flying in the wind, etc. And not as many women these days are still seen in board positions, CEO positions, etc. So have we really taken a step forward? I'm not so sure, which is, quite sad and disheartening to be able to say. I hope it changes. But what I would say is the main difference between the US and Europe that I've experienced is the cultural dynamics of corporations. So the things like risk aversion, are people willing to back not only females, but everyone into going into higher levels? The willingness to take chances and opportunities. I've seen a lot more of that in the US. I hope that Europe catches up, definitely, especially in the startup world. I mean, that's what it's really all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely interesting to hear from you on your perspective there. And obviously you worked in Australia as well. Was there any major differences there, or maybe things around cultural context, language, communication style? Yeah, anything that you experienced in that regard?
Tons. The biggest one that I learned though right away was something called tall poppy syndrome. So down in Australia and New Zealand, so for anyone who's listening to this that's from Oz, or they're an Aussie or Kiwi, will definitely know what I'm saying. So for me, culturally coming from the United States, everybody wants to achieve, to get to the top. And if you are successful, people rally around you. They want to know, how did you achieve your success? How can I do it too? And people are willing to share their tips and tricks. In Australia and New Zealand, what I found is this phenomenon called tall poppy syndrome, where if somebody wants to rise to the top, then automatically they want to chop them down. Everybody has to be at like this flat because everybody's equal in this sense of equality. From a cultural perspective, it gets one thinking, especially in a capitalistic society and working with businesses, how can you individualize yourself and how can you bring others up with you if there's this mentality of a tall poppy syndrome. So it was one of the really interesting, cultural things that I experienced.
Wow, yeah, I'm not heard of that, but it definitely kind of makes sense. And I suppose then your experience in Germany, you've maybe felt a bit in between, depending on the organization. I think the culture is obviously different. Growing up in the US as well myself, I definitely can resonate with the full throttle, make it to the top, and take people with you, but don't stop until you get there mentality, which I think also has an impact on, as you say, like work culture, things like vacation. Genuinely, like people in the US take less, and that might be a byproduct of, well, there's less time to rest because we need to get going. And that kind of all, I suppose, makes part of the picture, right?
It's interesting because I actually think this is one of the things that Europeans have right. And one of the things that in the United States that they have wrong, and coming, up myself through the US system, the whole idea of taking vacation is a no-no. So for example, when I used to work at Amazon, we got 2 whole weeks to start. Unbelievable, right? And then if you were even to take some of the days culturally within the organization, you were looked down upon. Oh my gosh, you're taking vacation. And some people actually used it as a badge of honor. Well, I don't take vacation. And it was so strange. And then coming now to Europe, where you get 4, 5, 6, whichever weeks of vacation, and people use it to balance their lives. And you can see people being so much more productive. So this is one of the things. Productivity is great, but balance actually creates more productivity than just overworking. So this is one of the things that I really think that companies in the US could take a look at. They do have the theory now of unlimited vacation. I'm sure you've seen some of the tech companies tout this unlimited vacation, but it can be very deceptive. Frankly, culturally, if you go to take this unlimited vacation, are you frowned upon? Will you still get your promotions? How are you viewed within the organization? And then sometimes, not all, but some organizations use it as a way to not pay people vacation once they leave a company because there's no vacation stored up. So it's a really interesting phenomenon that's taking place.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that, but yeah, definitely. Cool. Okay. So you mentioned imposter syndrome earlier. Have you ever experienced a case of imposter syndrome specifically, and kind of how did you deal with that?
Wow, everything from, I actually did, it was October, I think, last year. It was a panel on negotiation, something that is a hot topic. And at first I was like, do I have anything to say? Will what I say, will people actually want to hear it? And we were in a panel, and we're just talking about, fighting for what you want. In Berlin, for example, a lot of people have come to Berlin because they think that, housing is inexpensive or less expensive than other cities. That's changed over the past, years. And then thus employers were trying to say, okay, well, you can take less salary because supposedly, cost of living is lower. That has changed. And so just being out there and really telling the truth and, telling it like it is, women were coming up to me and they're like, oh my gosh, this is so valuable. I was thinking this in my head, but I didn't, really know if this was true or not. This is completely validated. And just to talk about your personal struggles and experiences. So I think that's really the heart of imposter syndrome. A lot of female leaders think that, their experiences and all of the observations that they've had, will anyone listen? Do people even care? Is it something to bring to the table? And the answer is absolutely yes. And there's so many people that have not brought their ideas and thoughts and observations to the table for that reason. And I hope to encourage others to change their minds and do so.
Cool. Yeah. I guess having like almost a vulnerability is important there, right? And when you share that, you realize there's probably other people in the same boat. And just having conversations about it really helps, which is great to hear. Any commonly held beliefs about women in leadership that you passionately disagree with?
Tons, but for the purposes of the time for today's discussion, there's one in general that I've seen, and I bring it up because I've seen it in multiple markets across the world. Women in leadership usually come to 2 different conundrums. Either they can be, perceived as super intelligent, but maybe not so nice, or they can be perceived as super nice and caring, but maybe not so intelligent. And these are the things that I've seen across so many multiple markets. And there seems to be a dynamic going. This can happen for men as well. Men are considered to, they're supposed to be so strong, or, if they show vulnerability, are they weak? As a woman, if you show strength, are you too aggressive? And I've heard this term so often associated with not only myself, but many women in leadership roles. If they're strong and confident and assertive, it's too aggressive. And oh no, we can't possibly do that. But if a man does the same thing, oh, he's a great leader. If a woman is caring, oh, well, she's supposed to be caring. That's her, psychological role within a leadership team, where a man can be just as caring. So I think we should look at people as people and different personalities to balance out a leadership team, when to be assertive, when to be caring, and maybe not associate with these things as gender roles, so to speak, more as leadership dynamics, and everybody's different. But that's one of the ones that I've seen so often across so many markets.
Totally agree. I've experienced it myself firsthand as well. How would you say, as a woman, if you are in that scenario and you're kind of being told, well, that's kind of aggressive, or maybe it's just a bit too confident, how could you, what would be your advice to anyone listening around how to maybe combat that?
I had a really interesting offsite. This was a while back, but there's a wonderful male leader. He knows who he is. Tons of respect for him, but he always had this situation where he would cuss a lot during, this, that, the other, and that was just his personality in his way. And in certain circumstances, it could really, rile people up and it could bring people together. But in other circumstances, it could be a little jarring. And we had an offsite once where he was just doing his natural thing. And then I got up afterwards and I said, you know what? If I would have gotten up and said the same thing, the same way that you did, people would have thought I was crazy. Just to show you the difference between how males and females can be perceived. And so it's to answer your question, it's just talking about it head on, and to do it in the moment when it happens, because in that moment, it's most impactful. People understand, they've witnessed, observed, the situation, and to start pointing these things out to get people to really think about what they're doing. Like I said, everybody has different personalities, but there's just some things as a female leader, if you do certain things, people perceive you a certain way. And sometimes it can be a double standard for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the idea of giving the feedback or thoughts right away is super powerful, because I think it gives like almost real-time feedback. Like I'm telling you exactly how I feel right here, right now. And you can't really have a thought process around like a disagreement with that. I'm giving you direct feedback on that. I think as well, sometimes as women and or as men, depending on the scenario, like we could also fall victim to taking on those roles, right? So like you mentioned, the caring thing, it's not uncommon for the woman in the office to also be the first aid giver, or the person who organizes the team lunch, or if there's a birthday, they get the card. And yeah, we also probably take those roles on a little bit, don't we?
I think what you're speaking to is a broader context, and there's been tons of articles written about this where they talk about how men traditionally have run companies and have made decisions, good or bad, but then they look to female leaders to clean up the mess.
Yeah.
And this has happened so many times, or to fix a problem. They'll ask a man to solve and to pioneer, but then they'll ask the female leader to fix it. And so this is one of the phenomenons. And again, it doesn't matter what country you're in. I've seen this in so many different countries. Something that I think is worth discussing and worth addressing. Yeah, but a really good observation. And back to one of your previous questions, you asked me, have you seen anything change? This is one of the things that has not changed yet that I would love to see change.
Cool. What do you wish your younger self knew about your current role now, if you were to look back?
Wow, quite a lot. So the inner strength is a piece that I think everybody should be learning at a young age, and in business school or whichever school people are going to get to where they want to in their careers. Everything is about subject matter. There's nothing really taught about the mental strength, the emotional strength, and what's needed in business environments, and especially in leadership roles. And a lot of times what I've said to my teams, and I know people say to each other, is you don't know the kind of leader that you're working with or dealing with until something happens, material happens, that you see their leadership come through. So having that inner strength is super important, not just for yourself and your balance, but also as a good example for your teams, for your company. And so I think it's something that has not been as recognized, as valued, and something that definitely needs to be taught.
Because it's difficult to teach that, right? Sometimes some people are naturally, well, I guess they've learned it at some point, but it can be quite natural for them to have that kind of inner sort of strength, determination, resilience, maybe through life experiences, as they're growing up. And other people perhaps have been less exposed to that, so they actually need to learn it rather than it being kind of naturally ingrained in them. I suppose there's probably, like, what kind of challenges do you see, if any, with the, I suppose, current, like the new workforce who are coming through post-pandemic world, more remote world, where they perhaps have less exposure day to day in the office compared to perhaps 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago when other people were starting their careers? Do you what kind of challenges might some of the new female women coming into their careers be? How are they going to go about that?
I think, and this is a question I think can be applied to both women and men, but a lot of times, I'm not going to say millennials, maybe more Gen Z and younger, these generations, and it's right for them to say so. They want their work to be impactful and they want it to mean something. But at the same time, there's the balance of what a business is. A business is there to provide a good or a service, and they're there to make money. That's the whole point. And if the business makes money, they can afford to hire more employees and so on and so forth. And I think what I've seen generationally is there's a difference between working to empower the business and to grow the business versus working just to identify yourself or to maybe add value to a particular cause that you have. And I don't know if these two things have reconciled themselves. And this is something I think you know what I'm talking about. There's this generational, I don't have the answer for this, but it's definitely something that needs to be discussed more. What I would tell to Gen Z, you have to not only work for something that you value and you care about, but you also have to really be focused on how you individually provide value to the business. There's a difference between a for-profit business and a not-for-profit. You really need to understand which environment you're in and how you're thriving and how you're adding value.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's still an opportunity, no matter what business you work for, to have a positive impact and feel fulfilled, right? But I think there's, it goes back to that element around like the resilience and understanding, like, you do have a purpose, you kind of have to stick to it and take people with you on that journey as well, which is, a big learning curve for sure.
I would just say that, women in general, we've made such great strides. It's important to support one another. That's another thing I've seen, women in leadership positions. It's been a slow curve to get everybody to support one another. So I think that's, the biggest thing. Certainly there are tons of communities. I myself am involved with 2 major ones in Europe, the Female Factor and also Femme Palette, both amazing organizations bringing, women leaders and just women who want to aspire to leadership roles together. So amazing organizations, if anyone listening, is thinking about joining. But for me, it's important to always try to give back. And that can be done in many ways. Myself, I try to mentor other women and show them what it really takes, what the real challenges are and what it takes. But in whichever form that lands, just supporting each other as a community is important. And the more women that we can have in senior leadership positions, the more examples there are going to be. So message.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, happy to share any of those links that you mentioned as well in the links below, and obviously your LinkedIn, so if anyone wants to connect directly to link up. And my last question that I ask everyone, for your bucket list holidays, where is next on your list?
So there's two places, one cold, one warm. So I've never actually done Norway and done all the fjords and do the great, I think it's the Atlantic Ocean Road or whichever that's called. So I definitely want to do that. And then all the way down in the South, Antarctica. So I think it's one of the last, frontiers, and I would love to do it. I think they have cruises. You can go, see the penguins, and everybody who I have seen that has done it in pictures, it's absolutely gorgeous and a lifetime opportunity. So
sounds amazing. The North and the South, very cool. Perfect. Well, Angeley, thank you so much for joining me today. Really enjoyed our conversation. Looking forward to continuing more conversations like this. For everyone listening, we'll be putting the links in. And if you'd like to directly connect on LinkedIn, we'll share that as well. But yeah, have a lovely